Hi, I'm Benton Stokes.
And I'm Elane O'Rourke.
And this is Cocktail Theology. Hiya.
Guess where I'm going Monday?
Where are you going on Monday?
I am going to Kentucky, but not to see your friend Sarah.
Not to see Sarah, no.
Not to see Sarah.
Not this time.
No, I'm going to the Abbey of Gethsemani.
The Abbey of Gethsemani. Tell us about the Abbey of Gethsemani.
I would love to do that. So the Gethsemani, first of all, one must know that it's not like Gethsemane in bad Gethsemane.
Right.
It's Gethsemani. There's an I at the end of it. I'm just telling you.
It just makes me laugh. It's like when you hear the name Sherry. Do you spell that with an I or a Y?
And are there two R's? There's an S. And
Gethsemane. Do you spell that with an E or an I?
Well, in this case.
An I.
An I. So it's Abbey, A-B-B-E-Y.
It's not the A-B-B-I.
No. Can I tangent a minute?
Sure.
So one of our entries into the Uncle Val's...
Yeah, we have to tell our listeners about the Uncle Val's contest.
So the gin that we are favoring these days is Uncle Val's Botanical. Now, Uncle Val's makes a number of three different gin. Like, that's a number.
It is a number.
Three, but it's a magic number. But the one we like is the Botanical.
So good.
And so they've been having this contest for tweaking classic drinks using Uncle Val's. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we, of course, entered it because we could. And we entered 6 different cocktails, although I've got another one in mind I want to try and get in before the deadline.
Ooh,
I know.
Okay.
Anyway, so what we did was we had this massive cocktail creation afternoon and evening.
We did.
We did. We came up with 6 good cocktails and a whole bunch of drain droppings or whatever. We poured a lot down the sink. Anyway, By the time we got the 6 done, we had names for 4 of them. We didn't have names for 2.
I love the 2 names you came up with.
But see, here's the thing about those 2 names. It was supposed to be tweaks on classics.
Right.
So I opened up my Savoy cocktail book. I have multiple cocktail books, but I opened up the Savoy cocktail book and I started reading cocktail things and looking for the ones that were most like what we came up with. So basically, I reverse engineered the name.
Right.
So there is a classic cocktail called the Abbey, as in Abbey of Gethsemani, which is why my brain went here, because you've met my brain. It's not a pretty place. So Abbey, so I said Cloister instead.
I like that, yeah.
So we named one cocktail the Cloister, and then the other one, I love this, classic gin cocktail. It's called the Corpse Reviver. There's a Corpse Reviver and a Corpse Reviver 2.
Yes.
And ours was most like the Corpse Reviver 2.
Okay.
Jairus' daughter. Now, for those of you who don't know this part of Scripture, there's this wonderful moment when a really important guy goes to Jesus and says, "My daughter's dying." And by the time Jesus gets there, she's dead. And Jesus goes, "Hey, I got this." He doesn't actually. Well, actually, he kind of does say that. Everybody leave. He lifts up Jairus' daughter, and Jairus' daughter is alive.
The Corpse Reviver.
The Corpse Reviver.
There you go.
I could have called it Jesus, but that felt really...
that would have been
felt wrong.
In addition to our 6 awesome gin cocktails, and fingers crossed something wins, you are going to the Abbey next week.
I am going to the Abbey, not the Cloister, of Gethsemani.
Yes.
I'm sorry, can I tangent one more time?
Of course.
A book I would love to recommend to our listeners is The Cloister Walk. It is a memoir, I guess, of a woman, and I won't tell you who it is because that'll shift the vision of it, but it's about her going and spending time in a Benedictine cloister. So, anyway, so I'm going to the Abbey of Gethsemani, which is most famous for having been the Abbey of Thomas Merton.
Thomas Merton, right.
And for those of you who don't know, Thomas Merton was a Trappist monk who influenced a whole lot of people. He wrote a number of books, his first one being The 7-Story Mountain, which I frankly find not as great a book as a lot of people think, because it feels to me like a coming-of-age story, and how many times can you read coming-of-age stories? However, he wrote lots of other stuff as well.
He did.
That was his abbey. His particular order, the order that is in the Abbey of Gethsemani, is a Trappist order. And the Trappist order is a cloistered order. That's a lot harder
really hard to say.
Cloistered order. What that means is the men who are there, as a rule, don't leave there. Okay. They live in their cloistered life. So when you think about monks being off in the mountains, never leaving, it would be like the Trappists.
Okay.
So when you go and you stay at the Abbey, there is literally a wall that runs between the visitors and the monks. If you're in the chapel during worship, they pass by, but you don't engage.
Okay.
So they have silence. So they are a silent order. So other than the times that somebody is teaching or that they are in worship, they do not speak.
Wow.
So they pray 7 times a day in communal prayer. And that is a liturgical type prayer. It is basically the Psalms plus stuff. And if one is a retreatant there, one may either attend those or not. The bell rings, bong, 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 throughout the whole place, so you know to go. You go, you do the liturgy, you leave, you go back to sleep, you do whatever you're going to do. Meals are provided. This particular one is a donation type rather than a charge type. But what it is silence, prayer, hiking, sleep, whatever.
Yeah.
So when I was pastoring full time and was a lead pastor, I went on silent retreat, personal retreat, 4 times a year for 3 to 7 days each time. Because for me, and those retreats were ordered only by my own sense of order. For me, that getting where I don't have to communicate and I don't have to be clear and I'm not being looked at for response is the most restful, peaceful, troubling time. So usually I'll get to a retreat like this, noon, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, whatever. I'm like kind of wired for 4, 5, 6 hours. And then I have a complete emotional breakdown.
Oh, wow.
Right? Because what's happening is there's nothing distracting me. And I start feeling alone and it's awful. It's like detox.
Yeah.
And then the next day I wake up and I'm like, okay. And then I just want to be in silence or prayer or walking or whatever, but I am golden.
Wow.
Yeah. I cannot wait.
That's awesome.
Cannot wait.
So happy you're going.
Me too.
Yeah.
And I go to all 7 prayers, including the one at 3 a.m, because it provides a different set of rhythms. It means my entire day is focused around prayer. And it's amazing. And as you know, from probably not the last time I was ever, the time before, there are times when I can't be silent anymore. I don't need to talk, but I need to write.
Yes.
And so you may remember receiving a missive from me a couple of years ago. It was incredibly long, and I don't remember what it said, and I really hope you don't either. But it was just that kind of, you know, I need to hand off these thoughts to somebody else.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But other than that, it's great. So that brings us into our discussion of spiritual fill in the blanks.
Yes. I've heard a lot about spiritual practices and spiritual disciplines, and I'll admit that in my faith life, this is a relatively new idea for me, just in the last few years of having, thank you, yes, she's doing the victory sign. The idea of having, other than prayer and reading scripture, having practices that you do, and I mean prayer is a practice, but
Absolutely.
having practices that you do, practices that you practice, and disciplines that you practice. Discipline, I don't know. Spiritual practices and disciplines and what the differences are between those. That's kind of a new thing for me. We had a friend a few years ago that went off for the summer to live somewhere in a communal environment. And one of the auspices of living there was that you had to have a spiritual practice. And this was not a Christian commune. So, your practice could be Eastern spirituality, it could be yoga, it could be a lot of different things. But our friend, being a Christ follower and being thrown into an interesting situation where he wasn't sure what that was going to be like and had no real spiritual practice, that was sort of an initiation for me because it made me think about it. What do I do regularly for my spiritual health? You're laughing.
Because I helped him write what his
You
spiritual
did.
practices were.
You
So if you're
did.
applying for this, I'm going to give you some spiritual practices and you're going to do them.
Right. Here's how you do this.
Here's how you do this, and this is going to be yours, and actually it'll be really good for you. And you just had a conversation with Greg Richardson.
Yep.
Greg Richardson is the strategic monk. Really interesting guy. I'm
So interesting.
So
Had a great
glad
chat
you got
with
to talk
him.
with him.
Yeah, he introduced me to craft beer in a completely different way, which is nice. I'm
Which
not a
is
beer
very
drinker,
good,
so-
and it involved chocolate.
Yes, I had a white chocolate lager. It was good.
And you were talking with him about that spiritual practice
was.
versus spiritual discipline thing. And of course, I come out of, in my last, 20 years, I guess, of thinking in terms of spiritual practice, spiritual discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means and what the difference is and all of that. And I think that for me, if I may, I'm going to kind of back this conversation up a little bit.
Let's do that.
Here we go. And I want to think about the words disciple and discipline.
Okay.
They are the same root word.
Yes.
A disciple is somebody who follows somebody else around, learning how to be like that person is.
Yes.
So, if I were wanting to learn to be a worship leader, what I would do is I would look at you, I'd do what you do, I'd practice the things you'd practice, and I wouldn't do it sometimes, I would do it regularly, like you do it, in order to learn how to do. Now, I may eventually kind of spin off and do my own thing, but first, I learn how you do it. That's what a discipline is. Disciplines are what disciples do to shape who they are and how they do things.
That makes a lot of sense.
So, that's what a discipline is.
Uh-huh.
A discipline is not a picking up a cat of nine tails and beating yourself because you haven't done something right.
Right.
When we are talking about discipline in the healthiest way, a discipline is something we do regularly to shape who we are and shape our character from the inside.
Yeah.
So one of the reasons I have my child pick up her room, even when she doesn't want to pick up her room, and even when I refuse to care whether she picks up her room, because otherwise it will make me crazy, is so that she is shaped about cleanliness, about not leaving stuff on the floor for mice to eat, that kind of stuff. It's not about beating her up if she doesn't do it. It's about getting into the routine so that you build the muscle memory, the spiritual memory, the mental memory to be able to do it.
To be able to do it.
Right? So like when you're sitting down to play a song and you haven't played it for a while, you play it through a few times and it's basically rebuilding muscle memory, right? It's getting that, oh, right, this is how my hands go and my brain goes. That's what a discipline does. A discipline trains your body and your mind and your spirit and your will to respond in a particular way without your having to think about it.
Yes.
A spiritual discipline is something that shapes your spiritual life. It's usually still a physical thing, but something that shapes your spiritual life. So prayer, if you treat it as a discipline, what it does is it frames the way you look at the world. So when I go to the Abbey and I'm praying 7 times a day with lots of other people, chanting the same words, everybody singing the same thing, doing the same, all of that, what it does is regardless of whether I am enjoying it at the particular moment, it keeps focusing my brain on the language of God. That's why you do a discipline. And the reason it's a discipline is you do it whether you want to do it or not.
Right.
So, when you're in your conversation with Greg Richardson, you had talked about how, as a musician, as kind of an internal who you are musician, and a songwriter, piano player, that person, you enjoy playing, you enjoy music, you enjoy that stuff.
Yes, I do.
And there are times when you don't.
Uh-huh.
And you do it anyway, if you have to do it.
If I have to, sure.
That's a discipline. So as much as we talk about in School for Seekers, spiritual practices and trying them on, what you want a spiritual practice to do is to shape who you are and how you look at God. You don't try it on for a minute and a half and say, oh, well, that's not going to work. You make it a discipline, which means you continue to do it for a while until you get the hang of it and it starts shaping you. Mm-hmm. And then you may find over time that it doesn't shape you the same way. Mm. So, all of that said, prayer is a fantastic example because there's a very wide range of prayer.
Yes.
Huge, right?
Yeah.
There's contemplative prayer, and there's centering prayer, and there's communal prayer, and there's liturgical prayer, and there's the kind of prayer that you do when you're by yourself, and there's the kind of prayer that you do when you lead other people in prayer. There's all these different kinds of prayer. Mm-hmm. If it happened that the Lord's Prayer wasn't working for you anymore, like you weren't feeling it, it wasn't connecting with God, it wasn't shaping you, you wouldn't say, well, prayer's out.
Right.
You'd say, maybe I should try a different form of prayer.
Yeah.
That's why it's a discipline as opposed to a practice. There's that sense of practice that is, and this is not a fault of the words, the fault of our society, that suggests that it's something you can just put on and take off again. Well, I'm not wearing pink this year. Mm-hmm. So everything that's pink in my closet is right out of here.
See me laughing, right?
I do see you laughing.
I have more pink in my closet than you do.
Yeah, you probably do, actually. But as much as I believe, and I think you believe as well, you experiment, you try things on, you see how they fit.
Oh, yeah.
It's not something that you're going to be able to tell right away.
It's not, and it's not something that's going to last forever either. Those practices work for a season.
How long is a season?
It depends.
Yeah, but let's give people, suppose they've never thought of prayer, for example, as a discipline or practice. They've thought of it as, oh, dang it, I need a parking space. Or, my mother is dying of cancer. Or, whatever the thing is. It is the spontaneous begging God for something or thanking God for something.
Right.
Why do you pray even when you don't feel like it?
Oh, there's so many reasons why. The biggest reason, in my experience, to pray when you don't feel like it is that it's how you know God. So, how I know God, how I recognize God in the midst of everything else, because my life and everyone else's is full of things that would distract us from God, or might resemble God, or sound like God. The only way that you know God is if you know God, and the way that you know God is hanging out with God. And the way that we hang out with God is spending time, and that's prayer. So, if I don't feel like praying, and I don't pray, then it's kind of like, yeah, that best friend that I have, I don't really feel like talking to them today. And then that day turns into a week, and then that week turns into a month, and then that month turns into a year, and then all of a sudden you're not best friends anymore. Because life just has a way of sort of...
Are you trying to say something?
No, because we talk every day, all the time.
But that's what I was thinking about, if you don't mind my leaping over it.
Sure.
Because it's all about me, really. But as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the fact, so one of our practices is that we text each other first thing in the morning, or close to first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
It's usually just good morning, or sometimes it's good morning, comma, reminding the person of what they really are. So I might say, good morning, songwriter, right? What that does is immediately reconnect us. And then, sometimes we'll go off and we'll do other things. And sometimes we're texting it just depends.
Yeah.
And I was thinking as you were talking about the discipline of prayer and the fact that we have texted each other so many times. My bet is that if I picked up our friend Kat's phone, okay, and I texted you the way I always text you, your first response would be, God, this is weird coming from Kat.
Why is Kat texting me?
And then it wouldn't take long, because I have a particular tone with you, that you would go, sounds more like,
How did she get Kat's phone?
How'd she get Kat's phone?
Right.
But you would recognize me.
Yes.
So the reason we pray is to learn to recognize God's voice.
Yes.
When God's voice comes in ways we don't expect.
Right. As it does.
As it usually does.
And many, many times when we are in a position of either crisis or a decision or something, and we're like, I just want to hear God. I just want God to tell me. Well, if you don't know God's voice, you're not going to hear God. I don't care how closely you think you're listening. Because there are so many other voices.
Yes.
And it's going to be just too hard to distinguish
Yes.
God. So the way that we know God is by praying and having a life of prayer, a disciplined life of prayer. And to do that, you practice. And maybe the way that you pray for a season works really well. And then, like you said, maybe if your practice is the Lord's Prayer, and after doing the Lord's Prayer for a month, it's not working, or for 6 months, it's not connecting you the way that it did when you first started, then maybe you change that.
Right.
Or maybe if praying in the morning isn't connecting you with God, maybe you pray at night before you go to bed. So many ways that you could practice prayer. If you're practicing prayer and what you're doing isn't connecting you to God in a way that it once did, then shake it up and try a different practice. But all those practices make up the discipline.
Yes.
So engaging in
Yes.
the practices
Yes.
and being consistent in practicing
Consistent in practicing is what makes a discipline.
makes a discipline.
Right. So if I am a weightlifter, or if I'm just trying to be fit, let's just say I'm trying to be physically fit, and I use some kind of resistance training. If I go into the gym twice a year and I try to bench press 400 pounds, that doesn't serve me.
No.
The discipline of regularly bench pressing 30 pounds serves me. That's what we're talking about. So prayer is a great example, but I want to just kind of throw out some other possible practices. So
Yeah, please.
So there are 2 books that I highly recommend when we're talking about spiritual disciplines. One is Richard Foster's book, Celebration of the Disciplines, and one is Dallas Willard's book, Spirit of the Disciplines. Those 2 books are great. And they divide up the disciplines, the traditional, long-term, Christ-centered disciplines. They divide them differently, but it's basically this. There are the disciplines where you are engaging with somebody or something, and the disciplines when you're not, when you're deliberately pulling away. So the pulling away ones are things like silence, solitude, fasting. You're pulling away from whatever it is you're fasting from. The engaging ones are things like prayer, service, worship. But the idea is that you're either engaging or disengaging. And both of those are important for shaping different parts of our lives.
Right.
And I think that I know for a fact that the traditional disciplines are time-tested and useful and good. The question is what you do with them and how you approach them. Fasting is the best example I can come up with. So I have struggled with eating disorders all my life in various ways. Fasting has never been a problem for me. I can fast a very long time. This is not a healthy thing for me. But as a result, it's easy for me, and it's not a good thing. Other people find it difficult to fast.
I find it difficult.
You find it difficult to fast. The key about fasting as a discipline is it teaches us to not depend upon immediate gratification.
Right. Right.
Okay? So for most people, fasting and praying, and they're connected, because when you are choosing not to have something, you turn to God instead.
Yes.
So you're choosing not to eat or not to watch TV or whatever the thing is. What that does is train you to turn to God. But it also trains your body and your brain to remember, yeah, I'll survive if I don't do this. Most of us do not need to fast for 2 weeks to figure this out.
Yeah.
Nighttime to nighttime pretty much will do it for most of us. For those of us with eating disorders, fasting in that sense may not be the best thing we can do for ourselves.
Right.
Because it's either too easy or it can spin us into a spiral. Fasting from TV, on the other hand, teaches us some of the same things.
Same thing.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it isn't about punishing yourself. It isn't about depriving yourself. It's about choosing to do something different. That's the thing about fasting. It teaches us to not satisfy our perceived needs immediately. I think that fasting in our culture is an incredibly powerful thing because we are all about instant gratification.
Yeah.
So learning to not have that.
Yeah.
So the disciplines all work, and what I mean by the disciplines are the traditional, time-tested, everybody's been doing them forever, practices that just work, and they work on us in different ways. And there are other disciplines or practices that fit the modern world really, really well. So one of your disciplines or practices would be making music.
Yeah.
You have recently been recognizing that making music or writing or engaging your creativity may in and of itself be important, not a side note.
Yes, right. I have recognized that.
Right? And in our culture, it is very easy, if you're not getting paid for something, to say, well, it's not that important because I'm not getting paid. When in fact, it may be exactly what allows us to be useful in other ways.
Right.
So when you have gone long periods of time without allowing that space to be creative, you haven't been as great as you could have been in other things either.
Yep.
Right? So it may be, for you, for example, and I'm not pushing you in any direction,
Right.
Would be that spending time writing, spending time just diddling on the piano, whatever, is actually a discipline because you need to just do it, even if guilt sets in, right? But it expands everything else.
Expands everything else.
So for those of us who write words, there are times when writing has to be a discipline. Sometimes we just need to sit down and do it, even if we throw it all away. We just need to get back in the habit of getting things out of our heads and onto paper, onto the screen. That's okay. One of my most useful spiritual practices is getting on or in the longest line at the grocery store or at wherever. And then choosing to get in the longest line breaks my need to get out quickly and breaks my impatience with people because I've chosen. If I just found myself in the longest line, I'd be impatient. If I choose to get into the longest line, then I'm like, okay, this is a choice I've made. What am I going to do while I'm standing here? Well, I'm not going to read National Enquirer, mainly because it's like really right-wing and crazy.
Oh, yeah.
But instead what I'm going to do is look at each person's face, recognize the humanity, and pray for that person.
Yeah.
Or engage. For you, the practice might be more about engaging because that's the harder piece, right? So you engage with the person in front of you. That's a spiritual practice.
We don't think about spiritual practices that way.
Right. But if you think about the things that train you to have the kinds of responses, muscle memory, mental memory, spiritual memory, that you want to have in the long run as your spiritual practices, and then treat them as something that need to be part of your routine, that's a discipline. Right now we are sitting outside on a beautiful night. It's just cool enough to be pleasant without being freezing. And there are bugs and frogs and all kinds of things making gorgeous noises. The sun is setting. The sky is this kind of very light, silvery gray. You can't really tell the difference in the colors of the leaves on the tree. Like it's really just before the sun goes completely down. And I'm going to speak only for myself. I am enjoying being here. But if I were anxious and needing to do something, I'd be like, okay, we just have to get this done. The choosing to get it done would be a discipline.
Yeah. The choosing to sit here.
And do it regardless. Choosing is a discipline. Right. Now, if I say to myself, I have to do this, it stops being a discipline. Because it's about outside.
Right.
Disciplines come from inside.
Right.
So when I force myself to sit out on the patio with you with an Oregon Pinot Noir and to talk with you, and I force
It's
myself.
so hard.
It's so painful for me.
It's so excruciatingly hard.
Because you know how much I hate sitting with you and talking. But on those days when the last thing I can't even say this. On those days when the last thing I want to do is to sit in space with you and talk with you and to listen with you and to look at your cute shoes, right? Those days when I force myself to do it anyway, not because I have to, but because I am choosing to do it, and it's the right thing to do, that is a discipline, my friend.
There you go.
That's
a discipline.
So for those of us who have young children, the choosing to take a deep breath before we respond is a discipline. We train ourselves to do that so that we respond in the way we want to. Because if we have to grind our teeth and respond, we won't. But if we train ourselves to take the deep breath or whatever the thing is, it makes it better. When our daughter was young, I would give her timeouts when she was being out of control. And it was for the purpose of giving her the discipline of calming down. I would tell her, Mama needs a timeout because I can't respond the way I need to right now. So I need to go take a deep breath and calm down, and then I'll come back. You're safe, you're fine where you are, but I need to go calm down. And by doing that discipline, she learned how to take time to go regather herself and then come back. And when I remember that that's what she's doing, it's awesome because she comes back and she's cheerful and she's good to go.
Yeah, it's great.
But it's a discipline.
But it is, yeah, it is a discipline.
So my discipline next week is going to be letting other people cook, having a tiny room with like 4 pieces of clothing, which, as you know, I would prefer. Going to prayer at least 6 times, usually 7 times a day. That will be my discipline because it will recalibrate who I am.
It absolutely will.
And I need some recalibration. And I've already told you that on my way back, I am picking you up and we are driving south. And it's going to be awesome. And if we actually do that, folks, we will record the conversations we have because the first one will be, oh my God, what are you doing, Elaine? I can't. And then it'll be fine. He'll calm down after a couple hundred miles. It'll be good.
I will.
Anything else you want to tell the people tonight?
Anything else? I don't think so. I think that's it.
If you are in the Nashville area, we do Wednesday nights here at the Earhart House. You can email us at info@schoolforseekers.com and find out the info. You can also sign up for our mailing list on schoolforseekers.com and you'll find out the info whether you want it or not. You can look up our Facebook page, which is, wait for it, School for Seekers on Facebook, or Twitter, School for the number 4 Seekers. Any of those things. So we do Wednesday nights here, 3 Wednesdays out of every month, generally speaking, and I'll be teaching. So the first half of the summer, I'll be teaching Bible 101, reading the Bible as if it mattered. And that's for people who learned to read the Bible because it was really, really important. They were all going to die if they didn't. Or for people who thought it was unimportant. And then the second half of the summer, I'm going to be teaching on the relationship between our bodies and souls and wills and minds and what it means to be human. Minor topics.
Yeah.
And then we're also going to do some Saturday retreats.
We are.
And if you are interested in that, again, info@schoolforseekers.com. You can visit us on our Patreon page as well, which is patreon.com/cocktail theology, and we will reward you for visiting us.
Yes, we will.
I do spiritual direction, which I call spiritual coaching because no one knows what spiritual direction is. And I do holy listing, and then you will do songwriting coaching, and you will write songs for people.
Yes, I do. And I do house concerts, and I lead worship.
Yes! Oh. We love to get the opportunity to lead worship and preach.
Yes, we do.
And he does the leading worship part because no one wants me to do that, although he could probably preach too. But that's how we divide things.
Nobody wants me to
but
do
we
that.
would... No. Are you kidding? Some of us really want you to do that because that would be awesome. But we love to do that, and we love to come to you. We love to teach with you and for you and have conversations like this in your house, in your church.
Absolutely. So the things that we do, that we talk about here at the Earhart House, if you're not local to Nashville and you can pull together a group of 20 or so people, we can talk about coming to you.
We would love to come to you. And if you want to pull together 2 people but still pay us for what 20 people would pay,
right?
I'm joking, but I'm not. I mean, the fact is we just need to get our life expenses covered.
Yeah.
We are not aiming to be rich.
Not at all.
So it really is about what's functional. So we would love to come to you, love to talk with your folks, do the combination of things we can do. Again, go to schoolforsecrets.com or just email us and say, hey, I want us to talk about this. You'd be surprised what we are able to talk about.
We talk about a lot of different
We're
things.
old, man. We've
talk
learned a
about
lot.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, he's not old. I'm old. I've learned a lot. And so there's actually a lot we can talk about. So we would love to spend time with you and your people. We do art, we do music, we do all kinds of stuff.
We do.
And what you love is what we love. And we want you to be joyful and whole and spiritually free. And however we can help you do that, we want to do that. So,
Yep.
The sun is setting, my friend.
It is.
We have lives separate from this.
Yep.
Which I find impossible to believe, but we do.
We do.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.